Hello from COP25, the UN Climate Conference, which is being held here in Madrid. My name's Sandrine Wheeler from the European Investment Bank, and I'm delighted to be joined now by our Vice-President in charge of energy, Andrew McDowell. Also from our partners and sometime friends, WWF, David McCauley. You are the Senior Vice-President in charge of partnerships at the WWF, and Sandrine Dixson, yes, who is the Senior Associate from the think tank E3G, as well as being the co-president of the Club of Rome. Now, here in Madrid, we are getting to grips with the big issues that we all care about. Of course, the climate emergency, but today we're going to talk about the exit from fossil fuels. As some of you may know, last month the EIB, which is the public bank of the European Union, actually decided to stop its support for energy projects that rely on unabated fossil fuel. Well, what does that mean in practice? What's the implication of all of that? I'm going to ask you, David, first of all, what was your reaction to that decision? And do you think it's going to have a lasting impact?
Well, I think it's very significant in this moment. The lasting impact we'll have to see, but definitely puts EIB on the vanguard of the direction we need to move in order to set the example going forward.
Now, this is not an easy decision, I mean, not least from the EIB, which had trouble getting that final decision, but eventually did. Sandrine, do you think, though, others will follow?
I think so, and what we actually felt was that if the EIB decision wouldn't go through, that would be an incredibly negative signal and a domino effect, because what we saw when the pledge was announced in the summer of this year was that Christine Lagarde said, well, if the EIB is going to put climate and the move away from fossil energy investments centrally in terms of its thinking, then we need to do the same thing at the ECB. We heard the same from the other central banks. We heard the same from the EBRD. We heard the same from some of the other MDBs. So not having had this pledge would have had such a negative ricochet effect that the fact that we now have it is fundamental in terms of giving that signal. We are the leaders here in Europe. The EIB now is really looking at itself as a climate bank, and we will work with other partners in order to ensure that this happens.
Now, Andrew McDowell, you had the unenviable task of shepherding this through. It is a decision, it's part of the new policy, it has to be implemented, but it's not going to be that easy, is it?
Well, and no, and it wasn't easy to get it through either. And I should say, if it wasn't for the engagement of civil society, both directly with us in terms of putting pressure on the bank, providing very valuable input into the bank in terms of what they saw the role as EIB being in the future in terms of the climate transition. But more than that, the engagement between civil society and our shareholders in the capitals themselves, if it wasn't for that engagement, we wouldn't have got this through. And I think there's a lesson for the EIB and indeed for other MDBs in terms of how to set up a process that really does generate genuine, transparent engagement between multilaterals and the wider set of stakeholders who are interested in their policies. So I'd like to just acknowledge that and thank our colleagues, knowing full well they intend to hold our feet to the fire in the future in terms of the accountability for the actual delivery of this policy. Obviously, there's big challenges ahead. We have made big commitments, not just in phasing out unabated fossil fuel projects by the end of 2021, but in all the positive things we're actually going to do with that freed up capital. So don't forget, for every euro of capital we're not now putting into fossil fuels, it is now available for clean energy technologies, for energy efficiency, for decarbonised energy supply, for clean energy technologies, for electrification of the European economy and indeed in our partner countries. That's a huge challenge for us now in generating that pipeline of clean energy projects, and we now need to move forward with an operational framework to actually deliver on the commitments that we've made.
Now, for those of you joining us now, we'd like to ask the question, what do you think? Do you think that this was the right decision by the European Investment Bank? Do you live in a region which is actually quite dependent on fossil fuels, maybe in Poland, for example? And that is a big issue, isn't it, David and Sandrine, that there will be regions that aren't quite as far advanced, for whom this will be a much more difficult job, or at least who will be saying, hold on a minute, we still need money for gas and that kind of thing.
Well, and certainly in the developing world where EIB has a significant footprint as well. And I think that this message will extend there, and it's going to be a challenge, no question. But with the price of solar and wind falling so precipitously, with technology investments being so high right now, and batteries and others that are on the forefront of this new green low carbon economy, I don't think we have any choice but to push forward in this direction.
Is this transition then, Sandrine, possible?
I think the transition is not only possible, but it's urgent, and it's part of the climate emergency signal that we have. We only have a decade to really shift, to maximize and optimize on our investments across the board: renewables, energy efficiency, low carbon technologies. And I think what's important is this matches very much not only what civil society wants, but what scientists are calling for. We were able to bring behind this pledge a maximum of stakeholders, from scientists, even investment community, business leaders, who are saying we need the signal from the big lenders. In addition to that, what I would say is, yes, we need to think about the just transition at the same time, but it's not only the EIB that needs to think about the just transition. It's how do we ensure that we look at all of our different instruments to ensure, through our structural funds, our cohesion funds, the MFF at the European level, but also the way in which we look at it in developing countries. How can we ensure that we very much bring them on board, bring them on the journey, and help them so that they can be real takers and have the pipeline of projects necessary to move towards decarbonization?
And you'll need specialized products like transition bonds to help those that are displaced by the introduction of the new green economy. We have to be mindful of that. Building on your experience as the world's largest issuer of green bonds, I'm confident that EIB is up to this.
Are you as confident as well, Andrew?
I am confident. I mean, it's going to be a challenge, and obviously it's not going to be something the EIB is working on alone. We need partners with the European Commission, with the member states, with local government, to develop the type of projects that are going to make this transition more just. It's not just in the energy space, of course. This is going to be about wider economic transformation in regions that are currently very dependent on fossil fuels. It's going to be about SMEs, it's going to be about universities, it's going to be about education, it's going to be about reskilling. We will work with other partners to bring the financing element into the equation, but obviously there's a lot of other elements that need to be brought to the equation. One final point I'd make about just transition: cheaper, clean energy is going to be very just at the end of the day. And I have no doubt that renewable energy is going to be a lot cheaper, more affordable, and is going to be regarded in the end as not just good for the environment, but good for social justice too.
And that's maybe a point that needs to be made more bullishly, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. And we can already see the beginnings of this in terms of the jobs that are being created by the new green economy, and way outweighing those that are being lost. But that doesn't help somebody who's been working in a particular sector for their whole career, and they need to make that adjustment. So we have to be very mindful of it.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, if you look at unemployment figures that were really growing in countries like Spain, Portugal, in Europe, when we saw the jobs growth, it was predominantly in the low carbon tech area. So this is very important. But what I also think is that this conversation is now going to so many different types of levels. So if we look at the work that the Trade Union Confederation is doing and starting to work with the unions to offer the possibility of shifting, what does that look like? The skills development, the new educational frameworks, the building in also national funds, because the just transition will not only occur in energy, it will have to occur across the board in a variety of sectors, so that we ensure that really we can mostly create the opportunities and have more winners than losers.
And like you said, it's not just the energy sector. We're in the middle of an artificial intelligence revolution.
Yes.
That'll have to be taken into account. We're in the middle of a closely related decline in natural systems health. And the nature crisis is now being seen as equal to, and obviously totally interconnected with, the climate crisis. All of this has to be simultaneously addressed. No mean feat.
So much to do, so much to talk about. We'll come back to you soon with more issues and more questions. For now, bye from all of us. Thanks to all of you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Yeah. Thanks.